The early morning sun cast a warm, golden glow through the bustling streets as Judge Angela Collins stepped into her favorite cafe. It wasn't her usual day to indulge in coffee, but something about the crisp air urged her to savor a moment of calm before heading to the courthouse. Her days often revolved around order and justice, but this small cafe had become her sanctuary, a brief pause from the weight of the gavel. The cafe hummed with life. Baristas called out names, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee danced in the air, and the soft hum of conversation made the space feel alive. Angela spotted a frail, elderly woman ahead of her, fumbling through her worn-out purse. "I'm sorry," the woman murmured apologetically, her voice trembling as she searched for the last few cents to complete her order. Angela stepped forward with a gentle smile. "I've got it. Please, let me take care of it." The elderly woman looked up, her eyes welling with gratitude. "Oh, thank you, dear. Bless you for your kindness." As Angela handed her card to the cashier, a voice sliced through the air like a whip. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Angela turned to see a sharp-eyed woman glaring at her. Lisa Bennett, dressed in a neatly pressed blazer, clutched her phone in one hand and a half-full to-go cup in the other. Her demeanor screamed impatience. "You can't just cut in line like that." Lisa's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of nearby customers. Angela raised her hands calmly. "I wasn't cutting. She needed help, and I wanted to." Lisa cut her off, her tone dripping with indignation. "Oh, so now you're the hero? You think you're better than everyone else because you can throw your money around?" The room fell silent. All eyes shifted to the unfolding confrontation. Angela's voice remained steady, though the sting of the accusation pricked at her patience. "Ma'am, I assure you, I was only trying to help. If this has upset you, I apologize." Lisa scoffed, shaking her head as if Angela's explanation was an insult to her intelligence. "Of course, people like you think the rules don't apply. No special treatment, lady. We're all waiting in the same line." The elderly woman clutched her coffee cup nervously, whispering, "It's my fault. Please don't blame her." Angela gently touched the woman's arm. "It's okay. Enjoy your coffee, ma'am." Lisa huffed, muttering something under her breath about entitled people before storming off to a table. The warmth of the cafe now felt tainted, the air heavier than before. Angela composed herself, taking her coffee and finding a quiet corner to sit. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the residual tension of the encounter. She had spent her career advocating for fairness and understanding, yet moments like these reminded her how quickly people could pass judgment. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed. A reminder flashed across the screen. Court starts at 9 a.m. Taking a deep breath, Angela finished her drink and prepared to leave, unaware that her path would soon cross with Lisa Bennett again, in a far more dramatic setting. The courthouse lobby buzzed with activity as Judge Angela Collins walked through the grand double doors. The sound of heels clicking against marble floors echoed through the vast space, mingling with the chatter of attorneys, clerks, and anxious defendants. Angela adjusted her blazer and took a steadying breath. She had long ago learned to leave personal frustrations at the door, but the heated exchange at the cafe still lingered in her mind. Just as she reached the security checkpoint, she spotted the same elderly woman from earlier, clutching a small floral purse and hesitating near the metal detector. Angela smiled warmly and nodded at her, but before she could approach, a familiar voice sliced through the air. "Are you serious right now? How is this taking so long?" Lisa Bennett stood a few feet away, her sharp voice cutting through the morning buzz like broken glass. She held a sleek pepper spray canister in her hand, her knuckles white as she clutched it tightly. A frustrated security officer tried to calm her down. "Ma'am, please step aside. You're not allowed to bring pepper spray into the courthouse. It's standard policy." Lisa's face contorted with anger. "Oh, so now I'm the problem? What about her?" She gestured wildly at the elderly woman, who flinched and took a step back. "She probably has an entire knitting needle set in that bag, and I'm the one being treated like a criminal." Angela's heart sank. She recognized the sharp edge in Lisa's voice, a blend of entitlement and simmering rage, fueled by something deeper than the inconvenience of a security line. Stepping forward, Angela spoke with calm authority. "Ma'am, please." There's no need for hostility. The officers are simply following protocol. Lisa's head snapped in Angela's direction, her eyes narrowing with recognition. Oh, it's you again, Miss Savior? Are you everywhere just to show off how much better you are than the rest of us? Angela held her hands up in a gesture of peace. That's not what this is. Let's all take a breath, all right? But Lisa wasn't listening. Her hand shook slightly as she gripped the pepper spray tighter. People nearby began to back away, murmuring nervously. Ma'am, the security officer warned, his voice firm. I need you to hand over the pepper spray right now, or I'll have to detain you. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Angela could see the uncertainty flicker in Lisa's eyes, the battle between pride and reason playing out in real time. But pride won. With a sharp, sudden motion, Lisa raised the canister and pressed down on the nozzle. A piercing hiss filled the air as a cloud of burning mist erupted from the canister, catching Angela and several others in its path. Chaos followed immediately. People coughed and stumbled backward, clutching their faces and gasping for breath. The elderly woman was quickly ushered away by a security guard, but Angela wasn't so lucky. The stinging sensation overwhelmed her eyes, and her lungs felt like they were on fire. Through blurry vision, she could just make out Lisa being tackled to the ground by two officers, her voice shrieking in protest. Angela sank to her knees, coughing violently as tears streamed down her face. A court clerk rushed to her side, gently guiding her away from the worst of the mist and toward fresh air. Your Honor, are you okay? Breathe slowly. Paramedics are on their way, the clerk said softly, her voice trembling with concern. Angela nodded weakly, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The pain was intense, but not nearly as intense as the disbelief she felt. How had such a small act of kindness spiraled into this chaotic moment? The scene around her was a blur of flashing lights, panicked voices, and uniformed officers restraining Lisa Bennett. But Angela's mind was sharp, despite the physical pain. She realized something then. This wasn't just an isolated act of rage. This was a reflection of something deeper, something broken in Lisa, that had finally cracked open in the most public and humiliating way. As the paramedics arrived and gently helped Angela to her feet, Lisa's furious voice echoed through the courthouse. This isn't over, you'll see. But Angela remained silent, her heart heavy with something much deeper than anger. The courthouse lobby, once a hub of quiet professionalism, had become a scene of chaos. The sharp scent of pepper spray lingered in the air, stinging eyes and throats, while muffled coughs and frantic murmurs filled every corner. Uniformed officers surrounded Lisa Bennett, pinning her arms behind her back as she protested with venom in her voice. You can't do this to me! I was defending myself, she screamed, her face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. Judge Angela Collins sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse lobby, her eyes red and watery, her breath still shaky. A paramedic dabbed her face with a damp cloth, speaking in a calm, measured tone. Take slow breaths, Your Honor. The worst of it will pass soon. Angela blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision. The sting was unbearable, but her mind remained sharp, her focus narrowing on the voice still echoing through the marble hall. Lisa Bennett, the woman from the cafe, the woman who had accused her of cutting in line, had just pepper sprayed her in broad daylight, in a courthouse of all places. The weight of that realization settled heavily in Angela's chest. Across the room, Lisa's wild protests continued as two officers escorted her toward a holding area. Her hair was disheveled, her blazer askew, and her voice cracked with hysteria. This isn't fair. You have no idea what I've been through. Angela's eyes softened for a brief moment as she watched Lisa struggle against the inevitable consequences of her actions. She had seen this before. People pushed to the edge, their anger boiling over into something uncontrollable, but rarely had it hit so close to home. The elderly woman from the cafe appeared at Angela's side, clutching her floral purse tightly against her chest. Her frail frame trembled as she lowered herself onto the bench beside Angela. Oh dear, the woman whispered, her voice quivering. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. This is all my fault. Angela shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. No, ma'am. None of this is your fault. Please don't think that. The elderly woman patted Angela's hand gently, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You were so kind to me, and now look at what's happened. People are so quick to judge, to assume the worst. Angela smiled weakly, the corners of her mouth barely lifting. Sometimes people carry burdens we can't see, but that doesn't excuse what happened here today. A security officer approached cautiously, his voice low and respectful. Your Honor, Lisa Bennett has been placed in holding. She's being processed now. Do you need anything else? Angela hesitated for a moment before answering. No. Thank you. Just keep me updated on her status. The officer nodded and retreated, leaving Angela with the elderly woman and the soft murmur of chaos beginning to settle around them. Angela's mind raced, threading together the events of the morning. The cafe, the confrontation, and now this. She had always believed in the power of second chances, in the possibility of redemption. But standing at the center of this chaos, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Lisa Bennett was no longer just an angry woman at a cafe. She was now facing criminal charges, and Angela was no longer just a bystander. She was the judge who would sit on the bench, the one person who would decide Lisa's fate. The elderly woman stood, her frail hands gripping Angela's as she leaned in close. You're a good person, dear. I see it in your eyes. Don't let this harden your heart. Angela nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Thank you. Your kindness means more than you know. As paramedics gave Angela one final check and confirmed she was stable, she rose to her feet. The courthouse staff had begun to clean up the remnants of chaos, the pepper spray residue, the scattered papers, the lingering tension in the air. But the damage was done, and the day's proceedings would now carry a shadow of the morning's incident. Angela took a deep breath and walked toward her chambers, her steps steady but her heart heavy. The weight of the gavel had never felt so real, nor had the responsibility of justice felt so deeply personal. The courthouse felt heavier than usual as Judge Angela Collins stepped into her chambers. The lingering sting of pepper spray clung faintly to her skin, a cruel reminder of the morning's chaos. The polished mahogany desk, the neatly stacked files, and the soft leather chair, everything in her office felt oddly distant, as if she were seeing it all through a haze. Angela sank into her chair, resting her elbows on the desk and burying her face in her hands. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual even. Moments like these, raw, unfiltered moments of human failure, reminded her of the frailty of justice. The courthouse, meant to be a sanctuary of order and fairness, had been reduced to chaos by one woman's anger. A soft knock at the door pulled Angela from her thoughts. "Come in," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. The door opened to reveal Linda Crawford, one of the courthouse clerks. Linda was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a gentle presence that often brought calm to tense situations. She carried a small cup of tea on a saucer, steam curling from its surface. "I thought you might need this," Linda said softly, setting the tea on Angela's desk. Angela offered a faint smile. "Thank you, Linda. I'm still trying to process everything." Linda sat down across from her, folding her hands in her lap. "Your Honor, I've been working in courthouses for nearly 20 years, and I've seen my fair share of incidents. But this felt different," Angela nodded. It was different. It wasn't just about anger, it was about something deeper. Fear? Resentment? I don't know. Linda hesitated for a moment before speaking. "She's in holding now. Lisa Bennett. They're waiting on your approval to move forward with her charges." The words hung heavy in the air. Lisa Bennett wasn't just a name on a docket anymore. She was the woman who had turned a moment of kindness into an eruption of chaos, a woman whose anger had blinded her to reason. Angela leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. "What do we know about her, Linda? Does she have a record? A history of violence?" Linda pulled a slim file from her clipboard. "Nothing major. A few complaints from coworkers about her temper, a couple of traffic violations, no history of physical violence until today." Angela sighed deeply, pressing her fingertips to her temples. It's always the ones you least expect. For a brief moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Linda spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked broken, Your Honor. When they brought her in, after the pepper spray incident, she wasn't just angry anymore. She looked scared, regretful even. Angela's chest tightened. She had seen that look before, on defendants who realized too late the weight of their actions. Regret often came hand in hand with consequences, but it didn't erase the damage done. "Linda," Angela said after a pause, her voice firm, "make sure she's treated respectfully. No unnecessary roughness, no harsh words from the staff. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter what they've done." Linda nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." As Linda left the chambers, Angela turned her attention to the cup of tea. The warmth of it seeped into her palms, grounding her for a brief moment. She knew what came next. Lisa Bennett would be brought before her, not as a stranger from a cafe, not as an aggressor in a courthouse lobby, but as a defendant in her courtroom. Angela's job was not to carry her personal feelings into the courtroom. She was not to let anger, frustration, or even pity cloud her judgment. The gavel she held was not a weapon, nor a shield. It was a tool, one meant to carve out justice from the chaos of human imperfection. She took a slow sip of tea, her mind steadying with each breath. Later that afternoon, the courtroom was silent as Lisa Bennett was escorted in by 2 guards. She was no longer the composed, sharp-eyed woman from the cafe. Her hair hung limply around her face, her eyes were red from crying, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the sleeves of her blazer. Angela watched from the bench as Lisa was led to the defendant's table. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Their eyes met, and Angela could see it, the regret, the fear, the shame. "Miss Bennett," Angela said calmly, her voice carrying across the courtroom, "do you understand the charges against you?" Lisa's lips quivered as she nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Angela's gaze remained steady, but her voice softened just slightly. "This courthouse is a place of order and respect, a place where conflicts are resolved with words, not weapons. Today, that order was broken. Do you understand the gravity of what happened?" Lisa's voice cracked as she replied, "I wasn't thinking, Your Honor. I was so angry, and I let it get away from me. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." The courtroom was so still that Angela could hear the faint ticking of the clock once again. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. Angela nodded slowly. "This is not the end of your story, Miss Bennett, but the choices you made today have consequences, and those consequences must be addressed." Lisa's head hung low, her shoulders shaking slightly as silent tears fell onto the table before her. Angela glanced at the clerk, signaling for the court to adjourn briefly. The next steps would be formal, procedural. But this moment, this fragile human moment, would stay with both women forever. The gavel felt heavier in Judge Angela Collins' hand as she prepared to re-enter the courtroom. The weight of justice wasn't just metaphorical today. It pressed into her chest, tangled with her thoughts, and made every step toward the bench feel deliberate and solemn. The morning's chaos still lingered in her mind. The sharp hiss of pepper spray, the panicked coughing, Lisa Bennett's furious face frozen in disbelief as officers restrained her. Angela closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. This wasn't just about a courtroom proceeding. It was about restoring order, upholding fairness, and perhaps offering a sliver of redemption to a woman who had lost control. As she stepped back into the courtroom, every eye turned toward her. The chatter subsided, and the room fell into respectful silence. Lisa Bennett sat at the defendant's table, her posture small, her hands clenched together on her lap. Her eyes were red and puffy, and the weight of her actions seemed to bow her head low. Angela took her seat, her voice steady as she began. "Court is now in session." Lisa's attorney rose cautiously. He was a young public defender, barely out of law school, and his nervousness showed in the way he adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, my client deeply regrets her actions today. She understands the severity of her behavior and is prepared to accept responsibility." Angela's gaze shifted to Lisa. "Miss Bennett, do you have anything to say for yourself before we proceed?" Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm so sorry to you, to everyone who was hurt, to the people who had to witness that. I don't know what came over me. I was angry, I was frustrated, and I let it consume me. But I swear, I never meant for it to go this far." Her words hung in the air like fragile glass, threatening to shatter with the faintest breath. Angela studied her carefully. This was not the same combative woman from the cafe, nor the furious aggressor from the courthouse lobby. This was someone stripped bare by consequence and regret. "Miss Bennett," Angela began, her voice firm yet compassionate, "anger is a powerful emotion. It can protect us, drive us, but it can also destroy us, and others when left unchecked. What happened this morning was not just a lapse in judgment, it was a choice, a dangerous one. Lisa's shoulders shook slightly as silent tears began to fall. Angela continued, her voice softening. But I also see something else in you, a spark of remorse, of realization, and that tells me there's still an opportunity here, not just for punishment, but for growth, for redemption. Lisa looked up, her teary eyes locking with Angela's. For a brief moment, the weight of authority and the vulnerability of regret existed in the same fragile space. The prosecutor stood and listed the formal charges: assault with a dangerous weapon, disorderly conduct, and obstruction of justice. Each word fell heavy in the air, but Angela could see Lisa flinch slightly at every count. Angela raised her hand to signal silence. Before I make any decisions, I need both sides to understand something very clearly. This court is not just about punishment, it's about justice, and justice must consider not only the crime, but also the person behind it. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint sound of Lisa's quiet sobs. Angela turned to the prosecutor. Is there room for a plea agreement here, given the circumstances and the defendant's remorse? The prosecutor hesitated before nodding. Yes, Your Honor. We would consider an agreement involving probation, mandatory anger management classes, and community service, provided the defendant adheres strictly to the conditions. Lisa's attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering something softly into her ear. Lisa nodded, her face streaked with tears. Angela leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but resolute. Miss Bennett, do you understand what's being offered to you? Probation, counseling, and community service will not erase what happened today, but it's an opportunity to rebuild, to make amends not just to this court, but to yourself. Yes, Your Honor, Lisa choked out. I understand, and I accept. Angela let out a slow breath, her shoulders lowering slightly. The path forward wouldn't be easy for Lisa, but it was a path nonetheless, a chance to turn chaos into something meaningful. I will review the final terms of the plea agreement, Angela said firmly, and will reconvene tomorrow for final sentencing. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck and the sound echoed through the chamber. Angela sat in her chambers, the faint light of her desk lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. The file labeled Lisa Bennett lay open before her. Attached was a photo of Lisa, sharp-eyed, confident, and composed in her driver's license picture. It was such a stark contrast to the woman Angela had seen in court today. Linda knocked gently and entered with a folder in hand. Your Honor, I wanted to share this. It's a letter from one of the officers who detained Miss Bennett. He said she was apologetic the entire time she was being processed. Angela took the folder, her brow furrowing. Thank you, Linda. Before leaving, Linda paused at the door. You know, Judge Collins, not everyone would have handled today the way you did. You saw her humanity, even when she couldn't see it herself. Angela offered a tired smile. That's the job, Linda. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about seeing people for who they are, even when they're at their worst. As the door clicked shut behind Linda, Angela sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the darkening sky. Tomorrow, Lisa Bennett's fate would be sealed. But tonight, Angela held on to one fragile hope. That even in the messiest moments of human failure, redemption was still possible. The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of the courthouse, casting golden patterns on the polished floors. Judge Angela Collins adjusted her robe and took a steadying breath before stepping into the courtroom. Today felt different, heavier somehow. The day's proceedings would not just be about sentencing Lisa Bennett. They would be about accountability, growth, and perhaps a chance for redemption. As Angela entered, the courtroom rose in respectful silence. Lisa sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles pale. Her attorney sat beside her, his face calm, but his eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. Angela noticed Lisa's trembling shoulders and the way she avoided eye contact with anyone in the room. Angela took her seat, her voice steady but compassionate as she began. Court is now in session. Ms. Bennett, today we conclude the matter before us. This court has reviewed the evidence, listened to testimonies, and considered your remorse and willingness to cooperate. Before I deliver the final decision, I'd like to say something. Angela paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. Lisa lifted her eyes slightly, her gaze meeting Angela's for the first time that morning. Anger can be a consuming force, Angela said, her voice clear yet soft. It can start as a spark, but if left unchecked, it can grow into something destructive. Something that hurts not only others, but also ourselves. What happened in this courthouse was unacceptable. Lives were disrupted, trust was broken, and fear was sown in a place meant to represent safety and justice. Lisa's lip quivered, and she blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. But, Angela continued, her tone warming slightly, I also believe in second chances. I believe in the power of remorse, accountability, and the possibility of change. You've expressed deep regret for your actions, and while that doesn't erase what happened, it does open a door to something better. The courtroom was so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning could be heard. Angela's gaze sharpened slightly as she spoke her final words. This court sentences you to 1 year of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory anger management counseling. You will also write a formal letter of apology to those directly affected by your actions. This is not a light sentence, Miss Bennett. It is a path, one that requires humility, hard work, and genuine reflection. But if you walk it sincerely, it can be the beginning of something redemptive. Lisa's shoulders sagged with relief, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Her attorney leaned over and whispered something softly to her, but Lisa's eyes remained locked on Angela. Thank you, Your Honor, Lisa said, her voice trembling. I promise I'll do everything I can to make this right. Angela gave a small nod. I hope you will, Miss Bennett. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, its sharp crack reverberating through the room. Later that day, Angela sat in her chambers once again, a stack of files in front of her. But her mind wasn't on the paperwork. It was still in the courtroom, still with Lisa Bennett. A soft knock came at the door, and Linda stepped inside, holding a small handwritten note in her hand. Your Honor, Miss Bennett asked me to deliver this to you before she left. Angela hesitated for a moment before reaching for the note. The paper was slightly crumpled, and the ink smudged in places, as if Lisa had written it through tears. Your Honor, I don't know if you'll ever truly understand how much today meant to me. You could have thrown the book at me, but instead you handed me a lifeline. I won't waste it. Thank you for seeing me as more than my worst mistake. I promise I'll do better. Lisa Bennett. Angela set the note down carefully, her eyes stinging slightly. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath as she looked out the window at the city skyline. It wasn't always easy to balance justice and compassion, to see the humanity behind the actions, the potential behind the mistakes. But moments like this reminded her why she had chosen this path. In a community center, weeks later, Lisa stood in front of a group of teenagers at a local community center. The room was modest but warm, filled with mismatched chairs and worn-out posters about self-control and emotional well-being. Anger isn't something to be ashamed of, Lisa said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. But it is something we have to learn to control. I didn't. And because of that, I hurt people. I lost their trust. But I'm here today because someone believed I could change. And I believe you can too. The teens listened, some leaning forward, others avoiding eye contact but clearly paying attention. Lisa continued, her voice softening. Every day we have a choice to let anger win, or a choice to pause, to breathe, to walk away. I hope you'll remember that the next time you feel like you're about to lose control. Because trust me, once that moment passes, you can't take it back. A young girl in the front row raised her hand. Miss Bennett, do you think you'll ever forgive yourself? Lisa's eyes glistened, and she smiled faintly. I'm working on it, every day. The courthouse felt unusually quiet as Judge Angela Collins sat in her chambers, the faint hum of the city beyond the window filling the stillness. A stack of case files lay untouched on her desk, but her mind was elsewhere, on Lisa Bennett. Weeks had passed since the sentencing, and Angela had found herself thinking of Lisa more often than she expected. Justice had been served, but had it been enough? Had it been fair? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Linda, the ever-reliable clerk, entered with a folder in her hands and a warm but cautious expression. Your Honor, I thought you'd want to see this, Linda said as she handed over the file. Angela opened it carefully. Inside were reports from Lisa's probation officer, attendance logs from her anger management sessions, and notes from her community service supervisor. Miss Bennett has been punctual and engaged during her sessions. She shows remorse and is actively participating in group discussions. At the community center, Miss Bennett has become a mentor to several teenagers struggling with emotional control. Her willingness to share her story has made a noticeable impact. Angela's chest tightened as she read through the pages. Lisa was doing the work, not just showing up, but truly trying to change. "She's making progress," Angela said softly, her voice tinged with something close to relief. Linda nodded. "It seems so. I think she's taking this seriously, Your Honor. It's rare to see someone turn things around so quickly." Angela set the folder down and stared out the window. The city below was alive, bustling with people who carried their own struggles, their own regrets, and their own chances for redemption. At the community center. The community center was alive with chatter and laughter as children and teenagers filled the modest space. Lisa Bennett stood in the corner of the room, wiping down tables after a workshop session. Her once sharp blazer had been replaced with a casual sweater, and her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. "Miss Bennett," a teenage boy called out, jogging over with a bright smile. "I did it. I walked away from that fight at school. Just like you said, breathe, count to 10, and walk away." Lisa's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's incredible, Marcus. I hope you're proud of yourself, because I sure am." Marcus grinned before running back to join his friends. Lisa's smile lingered, but it was tinged with something else. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe disbelief that she'd been given this second chance. As she continued cleaning up, an older woman approached her. It was the same elderly woman from the cafe, the one Lisa had confronted so harshly on that fateful day. For a brief moment, the two women stood in silence. Lisa's throat tightened as she fumbled for words. I'm so sorry," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "For the cafe, for the courthouse, for all of it." The elderly woman's eyes softened, and she reached out to pat Lisa's arm. "We all have moments we wish we could take back, dear. But what matters is what we do after them, and from what I can see, you're doing just fine." Lisa's eyes welled up, and she quickly looked away, blinking back the tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." In the courtroom. Again weeks later, Lisa stood once more in Judge Angela Collins's courtroom. This time there were no handcuffs, no trembling hands clutching a blazer. She stood tall, her posture confident but humble. Angela looked down at her from the bench, her gaze steady but kind. "Miss Bennett, it's been several weeks since you began fulfilling the conditions of your probation. I've reviewed the reports from your counselors, supervisors, and probation officer. By all accounts, you've not only met the expectations placed on you, but exceeded them." Lisa's chest rose and fell as she steadied her breath. Angela continued, "The path to redemption isn't easy. It requires humility, hard work, and a willingness to face your worst mistakes head-on. You've shown all of those qualities, Miss Bennett, and for that, you should be proud." Lisa swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. I can't change what I did, but I promise I'll spend every day trying to make up for it." Angela allowed a small smile to grace her face. "This court recognizes your progress, and I'm officially closing your case today. But remember, the work isn't over. Growth doesn't stop because the sentence ends. Keep walking the path you've started, Miss Bennett." The gavel struck, and Lisa let out a small, shaky breath. She turned and walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. That evening, Angela sat on a park bench after work, a rare moment of stillness in her otherwise packed schedule. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. She spotted Lisa walking across the park with a group of teenagers from the community center. They laughed and talked animatedly, and Lisa's face glowed with something Angela hadn't seen in her before: peace. Their eyes met briefly across the park, and Lisa gave a small, respectful nod. Angela returned the gesture, her smile warm and full of quiet pride. In that moment, Angela felt something settle in her chest. Justice had been served, but more importantly, healing had begun. Not just for Lisa, but for everyone touched by that chaotic day in the courthouse. The crisp autumn breeze rustled the trees outside the courthouse as Judge Angela Collins walked through the marble halls. The chaos of that fateful morning with Lisa Bennett felt like a distant memory, but its impact lingered in subtle ways, like ripples spreading across a still pond. Each choice, each word spoken in those tense moments, had set events into motion that neither woman could have anticipated. Angela stopped briefly at a large window overlooking the city. Down below, people moved through their day. Busy, distracted, living their own stories. She thought of Lisa Bennett and the teenagers at the community center. How many lives had already been touched by Lisa's efforts to change? How many futures had been altered because one woman had chosen to face her consequences instead of running from them? At the community center, Lisa stood at the front of the classroom in the community center, her voice steady but warm as she spoke to a group of teenagers. A whiteboard behind her was filled with scribbled phrases like, "Stop, breathe, think." "Anger isn't a villain," Lisa said, her eyes scanning the faces in front of her. "It's not something you can erase or ignore. It's an emotion, a real, raw, human emotion. But it's what you do with that anger that defines who you are." A teenage girl in a hoodie raised her hand. "Ms. Bennett, do you still get angry? Like, now after everything?" Lisa smiled faintly. "All the time. I'm human, just like you. But the difference is, now I know what to do when I feel it bubbling up. I pause, I breathe. And most importantly, I remind myself that no moment of anger is worth losing everything I've worked for." The room was silent, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was thoughtful, heavy with meaning. These teenagers weren't just hearing Lisa's words, they were feeling them. After the session, one of the counselors approached Lisa. "You're making a difference, you know. I've seen kids here walk away from fights, choose calm over chaos because of you." Lisa felt a lump rise in her throat as she nodded. "I just hope I can keep showing up for them." Angela's reflection. Back at the courthouse, Angela sat in her chambers, reviewing her docket for the next day. But her mind wandered back to Lisa, to the journey they'd both been on since that chaotic morning. It wasn't often that Angela got to see what happened after her cases ended. Once the gavel fell, most defendants became names in a file, faces in a memory. But Lisa had become more than that. She had become a reminder of the power of second chances. Linda entered quietly, holding a letter. "Your Honor, this came for you earlier today, from Lisa Bennett." Angela took the envelope carefully. The handwriting was neater this time, more confident. She unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Judge Collins, I wanted to thank you again, not just for your fairness, but for your belief in me. The work I'm doing at the community center has given me purpose. I see pieces of my younger self in those kids, angry, lost, scared, and every time I help one of them pause and choose peace over chaos, I feel like I'm healing a small part of myself too. You didn't have to show me compassion. You didn't have to see me as more than my worst moment. But you did. And because of that, I get to wake up every day and try to be better. With gratitude, Lisa Bennett." Angela set the letter down gently, her chest tightening with emotion. It wasn't often that judges received letters like this. Letters that proved justice wasn't just about punishment, but about transformation, the unexpected encounter. A week later, Angela found herself walking through the park near her home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the ground as families picnicked and children played tag. In the distance, Angela spotted Lisa sitting on a bench, speaking with a young boy who appeared frustrated and upset. She watched as Lisa leaned forward, her voice calm and steady, her hands gesturing softly, as if guiding the boy through his emotions. After a few moments, the boy wiped his eyes, nodded, and walked away with his shoulders a little straighter. Lisa looked up and spotted Angela across the park. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lisa stood, walked over, and stopped a few feet away. "Your Honor," she said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Lisa," Angela replied, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words, gratitude, respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of how far they'd both come since that fateful day. "You're doing good work here," Angela said. Lisa looked down briefly before meeting Angela's gaze. "I owe it to you, to the chance you gave me." Angela shook her head. "You owe it to yourself. I just opened a door. You were the one who walked through it." Lisa's eyes welled up, but she quickly blinked away the tears. "Thank you, Judge Collins, for everything." Angela nodded, her voice soft. Keep going, Lisa. The world needs more people willing to do the hard work of change. With that, they parted ways, Angela walking back toward the path home, and Lisa returning to the park bench where another group of teenagers waited for her. The courthouse was quiet in the early morning hours, the marble hallways still empty as Judge Angela Collins walked toward her chambers. The familiar scent of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee greeted her. But today felt heavier than usual. The case file sat waiting on her desk, its presence a weight she could feel before she even opened it. Lisa Bennett. Angela let out a slow breath as she opened the file. Lisa had been doing well, remarkably well, even. Reports from her probation officer painted a picture of someone deeply committed to change, someone actively working to rebuild her life. But the letter attached to the front of the file stopped Angela in her tracks. Miss Bennett was present at a local community event when a verbal altercation broke out between two teenagers. Reports suggest she intervened, but tensions escalated. No one was physically harmed, but authorities were called to the scene. Angela's heart sank. The words were sterile, clinical, but she could read between the lines. Lisa had been tested again, faced with anger, chaos, and tension. And while no physical harm had occurred, the fact that authorities were called spoke volume. At the community center, Lisa sat in a folding chair at the back of the community center's empty meeting room. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. Across from her sat her probation officer, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Lisa," the officer said, her voice firm but not unkind, "I need to hear it from you. What happened?" Lisa swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "There were two boys arguing. It started small, just words. But then one of them shoved the other, and I stepped in. I tried to calm them down, but they wouldn't listen. And for a moment, I felt it again. The anger, the heat rising in my chest, the same feeling I had in the courthouse that day." She paused, her breath shaky, but I stopped myself. I stepped back. I called for help. I didn't let it consume me this time. But I guess the damage was already done. The probation officer studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You made the right call by stepping back, Lisa. But this incident will be reviewed. Judge Collins will want to hear about it." Lisa closed her eyes briefly, her shoulders sagging. "I understand." In the courtroom. The courtroom was smaller this time, more intimate. Lisa stood at the defendant's table once again, her posture straight but her expression weary. Judge Angela Collins sat on the bench, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Miss Bennett," Angela began, her voice clear and steady, "I've reviewed the incident report from the community center. I've also reviewed your progress over the past few months, and I want to start by saying this. Mistakes happen. Progress isn't always a straight line." Lisa's lips quivered, and she nodded slowly. Angela continued, her tone softening slightly. "What matters isn't whether we fall, it's whether we get back up. And from what I've read, you made the right choice in a difficult moment. You stopped yourself, you sought help, and no one was harmed." Lisa's eyes welled with tears, but she stayed silent. "However," Angela said, her tone firm again, "this incident serves as a reminder that growth requires vigilance. Your progress has been commendable, Lisa, but you're not done yet. None of us are. Every day is a choice to respond rather than react, to build rather than destroy." Lisa finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Your Honor, I'm sorry. I felt it, the anger, the impulse, and it scared me. But I promise, I'm still trying. Every day I'm trying." Angela nodded. "That's all anyone can ask, Lisa. Keep showing up, keep doing the work. You're walking a difficult path, but it's worth it." With a final glance at Lisa, Angela adjourned the session. No new penalties, no revocation of probation. Just a reminder that the road to redemption is long and often uneven. In Angela's chambers later that afternoon, Angela sat at her desk, sipping tea as sunlight poured through the window. Linda entered with a faint smile, holding a sealed envelope. "It's from Lisa," Linda said softly before placing the envelope on the desk. Angela opened it carefully. "Dear Judge Collins, today scared me. Not because I was afraid of the consequences, but because I felt that old anger bubbling up again. But this time I remembered your words. I remembered what's at stake, not just my freedom, but my purpose. I'm still learning, still growing, but I'm not giving up. Not on myself, and not on the kids who are starting to trust me. Thank you for believing in me, even when I struggle to believe in myself. Lisa. Angela placed the letter down gently and leaned back in her chair. The weight she'd carried earlier felt a little lighter now. Growth wasn't linear, and redemption wasn't a destination. It was a journey. At the community center 1 week later, Lisa stood in front of the teenagers again, her voice steady, her presence calm. Sometimes we mess up, she said, her eyes scanning the room. We stumble, we fall, and we feel like we're right back where we started. But here's the truth. Every day we wake up, we get another chance to do better, to try again. A boy in the back raised his hand. But what if you mess up again? Won't people just give up on you? Lisa smiled faintly. Some might, but the people who truly care about you, the people who see your effort, they won't. And more importantly, you can't give up on yourself. The boy nodded, and Lisa felt something settle in her chest, a fragile but steady peace. The courthouse was bathed in soft morning light as Judge Angela Collins entered her chambers. The weight of her robe felt familiar, but today it carried an added sense of finality. The case of Lisa Bennett, a case that had started with chaos and anger, was reaching its true conclusion. Angela couldn't help but feel a deep sense of reflection as she sipped her tea, staring out at the bustling city below. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Linda stepped in, holding a neatly sealed envelope. "It's from Ms. Bennett," Linda said with a faint smile before placing it gently on Angela's desk. Angela hesitated for a moment before breaking the seal. Inside was an invitation. "You're invited to the Youth Empowerment Community event at the Maplewood Community Center. Keynote speaker, Lisa Bennett." Angela felt her chest tighten as a smile crept across her face. Lisa had come so far, from anger and regret to accountability and growth. The invitation felt like a symbol, a bridge between where they had started and where they had arrived. At the community center, the Maplewood Community Center buzzed with life. Colorful banners hung from the walls, folding chairs were neatly arranged in rows, and a small stage stood at the front of the room. The air was thick with anticipation as parents, teenagers, and volunteers mingled, their voices creating a hum of warmth and excitement. Angela walked into the room quietly, dressed in a simple blazer rather than her judge's robe. She didn't want to be Judge Collins here, just Angela, a woman witnessing the next chapter of someone else's story. She took a seat in the back row, blending into the crowd. On stage, Lisa Bennett stood behind a podium wearing a modest blouse and slacks. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and she clutched a small stack of note cards in her hands. The murmurs faded as Lisa cleared her throat and began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "If you told me a year ago that I'd be standing here, speaking to all of you, sharing my story, I would have laughed. Or maybe cried. Because a year ago, I was lost. Angry. And I made choices that I will regret for the rest of my life." The audience was silent, hanging on to every word. "But I also made another choice," Lisa continued. "I chose to face the consequences of my actions. I chose to listen to people who believed I could be better, even when I didn't believe it myself. And slowly, step by step, I started to change." Angela's eyes glistened as she listened, pride swelling in her chest. "I want you all to know something," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. "You are not defined by your worst moment. You are not defined by your mistakes. What defines you is what you do next, how you show up, how you grow, and how you make things right." Applause erupted across the room, and Angela found herself clapping along, tears pricking her eyes. After the event, the crowd had started to disperse, and Lisa was surrounded by teenagers and parents thanking her, hugging her, and asking her questions. Angela stood to the side, watching quietly, her heart full. Lisa spotted her through the crowd and gently excused herself before walking over. "Judge Collins," Lisa said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of reverence and gratitude. "Angela," she corrected with a warm smile. "Today I'm just Angela." Lisa's lips trembled into a smile as her eyes welled with tears. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you enough for your patience, your compassion, and your belief in me." Angela shook her head. "You've already thanked me, Lisa, by living out your second chance. You took something broken and turned it into something beautiful. That's all the thanks I could ever ask for." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared journey hung between them, not as a burden, but as a bond. Lisa nodded, her voice thick with emotion. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep showing up. For myself, for these kids, and for anyone who needs someone to believe in them. Angela placed a gentle hand on Lisa's shoulder. And I'll keep showing up in my way, too. Because people like you remind me why I do this job. Later that evening, Angela sat in her quiet apartment, staring out at the twinkling city lights. Lisa's voice echoed in her mind, along with the sound of applause and the sight of teenagers looking at Lisa with hope in their eyes. Justice, Angela realized, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about planting seeds, seeds of accountability, growth, and redemption. And those seeds didn't always grow overnight. They needed patience, care, and belief. Lisa Bennett had been one of those seeds, and now she was thriving, spreading roots, reaching others, and planting seeds of her own. Angela smiled softly to herself, letting out a long breath as she felt a sense of peace settle over her heart. A week later, Angela found herself back at the same cafe where it had all begun. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as she waited in line. She spotted a young woman a few spots ahead, fumbling with her wallet and looking embarrassed. Without hesitation, Angela stepped forward. "Here, let me cover that for you," she said gently. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. I'll pay you back." Angela shook her head with a warm smile. "Just pay it forward when you can." As she walked away with her coffee, Angela couldn't help but feel the full circle of the moment. One small act of kindness, one choice, had set everything into motion. And in that quiet cafe with the hum of conversation and the scent of coffee surrounding her, Angela felt something rare and precious: hope. This story wasn't just about a moment of anger or a chaotic day in a courthouse. It was about choices. The choices we make in our darkest moments, the ones we make when we're given a second chance, and the ones we make every single day to be better, kinder, and more human. Angela and Lisa walked different paths, but their lives intertwined in a way that created something meaningful. A ripple that would continue to spread far beyond what either of them could see. Thank you for allowing me to share this story. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to adjust, or if you'd like to reflect on it together.